The roots of corruption in Africa can be traced back to the colonial era. The corruptors of the African leaders are still empowering the new African corrupt leaders to serve their masters. The notion that the West deliberately kept Africa in poverty to exploit its resources and maintain control is a complex and controversial topic. It is essential to approach this discussion with nuance, recognizing historical dynamics, economic structures, and the varied motivations of different actors. While historical exploitation and unfair practices have certainly played a role, it is important to avoid oversimplification and acknowledge the diversity of perspectives. Colonial exploitation. One key factor contributing to Africa's economic struggles is the legacy of colonialism. During the colonial era, European powers carved up the continent, exploiting its resources for their own economic gain. The imposition of extractive economic systems, such as monoculture agriculture and resource extraction, often served the interests of colonial powers at the expense of local development. The establishment of artificial borders without consideration for ethnic or cultural divisions also created long-term challenges for post-colonial African nations. Unequal trade relations. After gaining independence, many African nations found themselves ensnared in unequal trade relations with former colonial powers. The terms of trade were often skewed, with African countries exporting raw materials at low prices and importing finished goods at higher costs. This contributed to economic dependency and inhibited the development of diverse, self-sustaining economies in Africa. Debt and structural adjustment programs. In the late 20th century, African countries faced mounting debt burdens, partly a result of loans extended by Western institutions. The conditions attached to these loans, often through structural adjustment programs (SAPs), mandated economic liberalization and austerity measures. While designed to address economic challenges, these programs sometimes exacerbated poverty, weakened social services, and contributed to an environment conducive to corruption. Exploitative practices by multinational corporations. The operations of multinational corporations, many with origins in the West, have been criticized for exploitative practices. This includes resource extraction without adequate compensation or environmental safeguards, contributing to both economic and environmental degradation. The lack of stringent regulations and oversight in some cases has allowed these corporations to prioritize profit over sustainable and equitable development. Political instability and corruption. The West has, at times, been accused of supporting authoritarian regimes in Africa that prioritize Western interests over the well-being of their populations. This support for regimes, even if corrupt or repressive, has been seen as a means to maintain stability and secure access to valuable resources. This has hindered the establishment of accountable and transparent governance structures. Global economic structures. The broader global economic structures, including trade agreements and financial systems, are often criticized for perpetuating inequalities. International institutions like the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and the World Bank have been accused of imposing policies that prioritize the interests of developed nations over the developmental needs of African countries. It is important to note that while these factors have contributed to challenges in Africa's development, attributing intent to keep Africa poor solely to the West oversimplifies a complex historical narrative. Many individuals and organizations within the West, as well as in Africa, have actively worked towards sustainable development, fair trade, and poverty alleviation. Addressing the challenges faced by Africa requires a nuanced understanding of historical legacies, current geopolitical dynamics, and a commitment to collaborative solutions.